Hello, I'm glad to present this new edition of the seminar Developing the Present Contributions to a Post-Pandemic Economy, organized by Banco del Alba. This year, the central theme of this international seminar is the contributions for a post-pandemic economy. This would contribute to the debate, analysis, and recommendations necessary for the constructions of the public policies in the difficult situation generated by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to introduce the experts who are going to participate in this seminar. First of all, we are going to listen to Diego Sequeira. He's a researcher of the Samuel Robinson Institute for the Original Thinking. Then we are going to listen to Ms. Daniela Rodriguez, Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of the Venezuelan Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we will listen to Raúl Licauce, President of the Executive Directory of Banco del Alba. Well, we are going to open this session. Mr. Diego Sequeira, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Licauce, Mr. Rodriguez. Great, thank you very much. Your Excellencies, I'm honored to give this short insight of this year. And in the frame of this conversation we're having today, well, let me first of all remark that this is not a scholar insight on economics, or it's not scholar in any way. It's based on experience and observation of, especially of this crazy, surprising, chaotic, unexpected year, our first year of under pandemic, and this strange interregnum we are right now with everything, with all this major, some visible, some not so visible tectonic shifts. We can, first of all, I think we can address some key aspects, some key facts from this year. I think, first of all, the role that sovereignty, independence, especially state and nation state has played in COVID, I think it's one of the most important phenomena, if you can call it that way. Especially because we're used to, especially on the economics and financial side of things, we're always used to a lot of technicalities, a lot of wording, a lot of jargon, a lot of gibberish, especially from the point of view of a non-specialized, a non-familiar person with the whole technical part of economics. If something has been proven, especially under the neoliberal diktat, is how it simply doesn't work, how it didn't work, and how that not working is part of a political wheel. So in that same sense, you can say the same thing about what states and governments have done to cope and to face the pandemic threat. And you can even take them as the most basic declaration of principles of what their purpose is. I'm thinking now about what the Valdai discussion group have said this year, surviving, the report is called Surviving, Keeping Sane on a Crumbling World, the role the state has played during this pandemic, and I think it's pretty insightful and descriptive of the whole of the role that state and sovereignty have played in this juncture, this global juncture we're in. So they say, and I quote, "A sovereign state is the only institution capable of acting in a relatively organized and effective manner." Right? And I bring this to discussion basically because we've seen how all these non-state actors, all these supra-state actors that we're used to see in the global arena on normal times, showing the way, giving orders, like patronizing and taunting us on how to do things, actually were the ones who did the less. In that sense, that brings us to what's the point then of all this elaborate language, all this technicality, if it's not going to do its main purpose, which is basically protect life, especially on elected states, especially on the international relations, especially on cooperation too. We live in a region that has like both ends of this experience. I can think about from one end what Venezuela has done with so few, under so many pressure, and also Cuba and Nicaragua, for example. And you have on the other end, countries that actually have had strong leeway, political leeway in every aspect, that actually haven't been able to deliver any kind of safety or dignity to their own people during these hard times. So I think that's one of the main conclusions of this all. It's that states have a role to play. Real economy based on real activity, human activities, as in work, labor, and trade, also have. So it's pretty descriptive of what could come or what should be the world we're going to see afterwards, once the pandemic in a year or two finally recedes, when the vaccine starts to be successful. I don't know, because we all know, what we do know, we all know we're in real uncertain times. So uncertainty is something we're going to live with. So these small tokens of certainty have a new value now. I mean, regardless of global elite capital flow, aggression is the real value of neoliberalism. I think that's another fact that we can now also conclude from what, at least from this 2020, has taught us. I want to bring, if I may, a kind of long quote by the late David Graeber, the anthropologist, who actually did a lot of thinking about this kind of things at depth and the actual basic questions about work, labor, and economy. And he said, precisely on this history of debt he wrote 4 years ago, he said something like, I'm quoting now, "So what is the status of all this money continually being funneled into the US Treasury? Are these loans or is it tribute? In the past, military powers that maintain hundreds of military bases outside their own home territory were ordinarily referred to as empires, quote unquote. And empires regularly demanded tribute from subject peoples. The US government, of course, insists that it is not an empire, but one could easily make a case that the only reason it insists on treating these payments as loans and not as tribute is precisely to deny the reality of what's going on, as in hard fact, violent empire. And also the way of violence, and this is also Graeber, or the threat of violence turns human relations into mathematics. So this is kind of like the know-how we were kind of used to in the idea of common sense that we were accustomed to, especially all these years, without actually addressing the real deep problems of this financial instruments, of this logics, and also the purpose of what banking is for, and the value that a bank should also protect. So in this strange context, it's kind of, one more time, it's a matter of will. Doesn't matter the language you use to relate or to address any given sphere of human activity. That's all of them, of course, are mediated by economy, by real economy and the economic system. And also the relationships between nations and allegedly cooperation. So this year, at least at this point, we're mid-November, almost close to finishing it, the month. We can see now, we can make at least a small summary of basically the role that the economy has played this year, the role that the role the state and the economy has played this year, and the role that state and market and economy have played this year. And how actually a frail system that could be that something, a major interrogation brought forth by an unexpected situation such as the pandemic, it has been so candidly exposed on their own inability or their ability to actually address this kind of situations, and the role also that cooperation or solidarity has to play with this. It's also pretty interesting how, yes, economy and finance are also based on global, more liquid structures, but how on these times that everything is strained, and also estranged among this complexity, it's able to give words, to give some sort of reply, and all these replies are actually based now on facts. And the basic fact among these, it's how much does a government, a state, and the role the economy plays on that government and their international relationships is actually willing to save or to condemn lives. It's kind of descriptive that this is something I've been stressing a lot in a lot of places. I think, well, my friend Ray here also knows about this because we already talked about this before. But you can think about, in this hemisphere, the two nations, the two countries that supposedly have had the worst development, the worst response to COVID, are actually the two countries that also inherited almost untouched the slavery logics, because we're talking here about Brazil and the US. At this point in time, they're basically the country with most infected, most deceased people thanks to COVID. So this is something that it's pretty descriptive, and also it's pretty simple. There's no complexity here. And that's also, I think, a major lesson that gives us all this, what necessities are really about, and what the role of that money and value has to play in all this. This also brings us to another point, and maybe we can think this as even as a threat, because now we have to ask ourselves, what's the world that's going to be once COVID recedes, once COVID is some way or another under control? And we already are aware of the projects that some of these forces, suprastate forces, multinational forces, are starting to introduce in conversation in everywhere and try to build a common sense based on those notions. So now we're hearing a lot about the Great Reset, which is basically an initiative that's been materialized or at least verbalized from Davos, first of all. And inside of this, within this large rationale, they already have given some sound bites, some fragments of what this could be, in a very well presented, well dressed, well disguised way, as they usually do. Those are the new mirrors and the new cheap jewelry they're going to try to offer us at this point, or at least that's what one could think. And I'm thinking now, for example, what Max Carney, former head of the Bank of England, and who now leads Boris Johnson's climate finance team, said. This was around June of this year, which actually I think is one of the first moments that actually the Great Reset as a concept is introduced, which, by the way, it's pretty much in line with a Democrat government in the U.S. is going to also be part of. And I'm quoting here what Carney says. Achieving net zero emissions will require a whole economic transition. Every company, every bank, every insurer and investor will have to adjust their business model. This could turn an existential risk into the greatest commercial opportunity of our time. But why? I mean, that's the main question. Of course, we have the whole context of the Internet of Things, of e-commerce, of e-money, and we also have all this talking about the fourth industrial revolution and the AI of work and the mechanization of work and so on and so on. But it's not so hard to see through the lines, especially because it's based on the offer of a closed system, a system that's also telling us that there's no other way than to, I mean, this is where everything stops. This is where everything reaches, and so now we have like these strong boundaries, and we have to take some steps back, deindustrialize, and change our relationship with resources and with the environment. Of course, there's this soft power side that's very noble about all this environmental concerns and so on, but I don't think that's the only way it actually goes. I don't think that why do they have this saying, and they do call this part of the world something like common values, common patrimony, common property, and I'm thinking about the resources in the global south, not only in Latin America, not only in the Caribbean. I'm thinking also of course, our brothers and sisters in Africa or in Asia. And it's clear enough how all this well-intent gibberish, it's coming from actually the most severe and austerity promoters of global economy and finance. So this is a moment that not only brings these new questions about why them are the one calling the shots about this, but also what to do about this. And this is also very interesting because this has also come with regime change attempts throughout all these years, and this is something the Venezuelan experience, or the Bolivian experience, or the Nicaraguan experience, or even the Dominican experience have gone through these years. And the interesting part is how success on these geopolitical realignments is something that is always very predictable, how that breaks down. But there's no actual answer on what happens if this economic pressure, sanctions, and so on, economic terrorism in some, and also violent means, political and military, to achieve regime change or realignment or appeasement, political appeasement on this side of the world. If they don't succeed, this doesn't, I mean, we don't have, that's another major question that we have to address because we don't have it, but we are aware of one thing. They don't have it either, and there's a major void that's creating this. There's a tension between all those failed regime change attempts and our own initiative, and we need to fill this void. And I think one of the best and most important and also very discrete precedents of how to do things, it's not something that comes out of the blue. It actually remains close to the basics, and I think that this has been one of the main achievements of Banco del Alba all these years. Keep to the basics, no Baroque operations, no risk-taking in money issues and on the international financial system, especially on a moment like this. And so it sets a very good example of how cooperation, how the sovereignty, and also the role that nation states have in this juncture that's far from over, have to play at this moment. I would like, if you allow me, to give you another quote, this one from Chairman Xi Jinping. It's his 2016 speech at the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee address, the yearly address. And he said something that I think is also pretty in tune with what we're talking here and what we're thinking of and the questions that arises from all this. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "Coordinated development is the unity of balanced development and imbalanced development. The process from balance to imbalance and then to rebalance is the basic law of development." And this, I think, is very important because it's a breathing law, and its outliers have to be considered more like opportunities to actually build something new and to be less fragile than before. And with all this skin in the game experience we have, and she says, and I'm continuing with a quote: "Balance is relative, while imbalance is absolute. Emphasizing coordinated development is not pursuing equalitarianism, but giving more importance to equal opportunities and balanced resource allocation." I think also this is something, living in this unpredictable, volatile, asymmetrical world, I think that's one of the main guidelines on on the notion of balance. And I think that is also something that you can also associate with what even Simón Bolívar, el Libertador, said about the balance of the universe back then. I mean, how with so few resources and some will and some soldiers also willing to fight the real fight, are able to actually give balance to the universe. And this is a happy metaphor. It's not, of course, a metaphysics or something. It's just the language of the day. But it was also a strong metaphor and an idea he took with him for a long time, and he actually wrote about this in the hardest moment one of the hardest moments in his life, and actually it was in Jamaica that he did that, which is also pretty funny when you think about that part too. So we've been already used too much to be the lifeline of the northern part of the world when they're in trouble, and how they save themselves from themselves using us as their resource supplier, And this brings something else about wealth and value, I think, and this is my ending remark. I mean, but we also used to, and this is an idea from the late also Charles Bowden, he talked about it, the American writer, the US writer, he talked about the hopeful part of, in his case, he's talking about NAFTA, but it's something that we can think about also in the Caribbean context or our own context in South America, which is all this huge wealth transfer that's actually dispossession coming from south to north via this institution, via this notion of common sense and how things are supposed to work, but also the other way around, how the strongest and most descriptive transfers of wealth from poor to poor actually come from that side of the world to this one. And I'm thinking about, for example, all the families that are forced to migrate and forced to abandon their country and send money back home to actually keep things moving when maybe some hardships are there, like, for example, like trying to build a house, try to finance the family's small company or anything. And I think that kind of logic is something that's also something that we can bring over and confirm that's something that at a state and a national level, an international level, and a regional level, it has proven it has a real value, and it shows us even more than all this Ivy League, Harvard, City of London knowledge. So it's wonderful to be in a moment that it's frightening, yes, I know, but it also needs more questions and answers, and I think we're able to give them, as history has taught us, and how our own people and our own nations have taught us when we try to think about all this. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be part of this, and I celebrate this address where we're tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego. Is there any comment on what Diego has said? Well, now it's time to listen to Daniela Rodriguez. Like I said, she's Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of the Venezuelan Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Raul and dear Mr. Sequeira, for the invitation. I would like at the outset to thank for organizing this important seminar. Also to congratulate the Banco del Alba for in its anniversary and for the important work that is developing in our region. Well, my speech is going to be focused in three main points that I would like to share with all of you today. First, I would like to talk about the pandemic and all the geopolitical situation, all the geopolitical transformations, because the scope of the COVID pandemic is one of the main threats that we need to face right now. Not only for affect the life of and the health of our people, also because it represents a threat to the development, the equality, and the economic progress of our countries. This make us and invite us to quickly analyze the future impacts that this crisis will have in the world today. Getting this situation getting worse and getting to global inequality that is increasing. Our only alternative is to implement is the implementation of an effective, multidimensional, and inclusive cooperation. However, it is important to consider that before the pandemic arrived to our world, we have experiencing a global order transformation, a very international context, an international context that has too much threats against the nations, against the states, against the countries. This is a consequence of the emergency of the multipolarity and the pluripolarity and all the new platforms of integration and of cooperation. We, at our region, we have experiencing and promoting a new vision of integration. We have promoted the creation of the ALBA, UNASUR, and new platform of concertation and cooperation with different parts of the world, with the emergency powers as Russia, China, and Iran. So this has increased increased the tensions, the geopolitical tensions, as a consequence of our peoples and countries have presented a new options to build a new world order, more inclusive, more democratic, that respect the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, the principles of the independence of our states, the principles of the sovereignty, and the cooperation based in in solidarity, in a vision of complementarity. The creation of ALBA, Petrocaribe, CELAC, and UNASUR are part of this new architecture of world power, which seeks to defend the geopolitical objectives and interests of the Latin American and Caribbean nations, and has, furthermore, opened up a new space for the shaping of new alliances and having an important impact in the process of geopolitical redistribution of power. The emergence of China and Russia has called for a reordering the areas of interest and influence at the global level, which has reduced the U.S. scope of action in various parts of the world where it could previously move as its own way, such Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Middle East, and also our Latin American and Caribbean region. For this reason, we have been able to observe that in the last decade, the United States of America have focused much attention in attack the progressive alliance that was established in our continent that have played an important role to restrain the U.S. interest in our regions. The coup d'etat in Brazil represents an important example of this, as Brazil is a significant key between the BRICS and UNASUR, and the change of the government in that country really affected the emergency of the South global power. The attack on UNASUR is an accurate attack on peace and regional stability. The creation of a South American organization to ensure the peaceful resolution of disputes, the protection of the region's natural resources, and its collective defense. So this is our priority, to promote the regional cooperation, to promote the integration in our region, but is the main priority of the U.S. Foreign policy, dissolve all this initiative. The second main issue that I would like to address to you today is regarding the pandemic and the neoliberalism, because it is complex to live in a global pandemic and to fight against a global pandemic within a neoliberal system that lags behind the only salvation of humanity, cooperation. Both diseases, COVID and neoliberalism, must be viewed with the same rigor analysis. The first virus, COVID, may become unsustainable with the support of science and the socialization of the vaccine, which is no longer a scientific challenge. It will not be so difficult in our technological age to find the biological weakness of the virus. In fact, the age of COVID is not the age of the Black Death, where people did not even know what exactly was killing them. Right now, the science knew in just 2 weeks the sequence of the COVID genome. In this century, we are equipped with what's necessary to stop a pandemic. But what about the second virus, the neoliberalism? The neoliberalism could lead us to the worst catastrophe. The COVID, which can never be underestimated, can generate death of around 5% of the world population. And how many deaths does it generate the neoliberalism today? And how many deaths is going to generate the neoliberalism tomorrow? Are we going to manage this pandemic crisis with free market recipes? That will undoubtedly place us in a phase of global collapse. The COVID within liberalism and neoliberalism will lead countries to become more isolated, as liberalism is hardly mixed with international cooperation. And more, and it's worse with the solidarity. It is almost like trying to hit water with ice. Even though solidarity throughout history has been the origin of progress much more than competition, let us ask ourselves, for example, will the vaccines have produced in the laboratory of countries that are part of the world's powers reach developing nation of poor nation in necessary and enough quantities? We think it's important to make ourselves one more question. Is going to the neoliberalism to socialize these vaccines for every people in the world in equal conditions? So we need to understand that it's not neoliberalism the way that is going to give us the answer for COVID pandemic and the post-COVID societies that we will have. We need right now to take this opportunity to move forward for new types of cooperation based in the solidarity, in the equality, because we need to preserve the lives of our peoples, and we need to guarantee that this vaccine is going to get to every people in the world. Pandemic and cooperation. This is the third main issue that I would like to share with all of you today. Next year, the economy in the Latin American region is expected to shrink by 8.1%, and the world economy by 4.4%. The impact that the pandemic will have on the fulfillment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is well known, and this is the main concern of our peoples and our governments right today. Just to mention the more important ODS that we need to reach in the 2030 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, actually, is ending, the first of these goals are ending poverty in all its forms throughout the world. It is estimated that 71 million people will return to extreme poverty by 2020, the first increase in global poverty since 1998. Loss of income, limited social protection, and price increase mean that even those who were secure may be at risk of facing poverty and hunger. This is around the world. The ODS 2, regarding ending hunger, achieving food security and improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture, we have that the total number of severely food insecure people is increasing since 2015, and millions of children are still undernourished. The economic slowdown and disruptions in food value chains caused by the pandemic are exacerbating hunger and food insecurity. Measures should be taken to strengthen food production and distribution systems immediately to mitigate and minimize the impact of the pandemic. I was recently following a podcast regarding the terrible situation of the food that the world is going to face the next year, because maybe right now we don't feel the shortage of food because we are living with the food production of the last year. But a different issue is going to be the next year, because the next year we are going to face the situation of all the food that weren't produced this year. So our countries and people need to prepare to this situation, and all these think tanks like the Samuel Robinson Institution should to assess our governments and people about what is going to mean this for the next year, no? ODS 3 ensure a healthy life and promote the well-being of all people in all age. Approximately 70 countries reported moderate to severe disruption or even suspension of child immunization service in this year. All this is a consequence of the pandemic. ODS 4 ensure inclusive and equality education. Well, we have seen that not all countries has the capability to take the schools to the homes. This is something that our country could make very well because we were prepared, but that is not the situation of the big majority of the member states of the United Nations. School closures kept 19% of the world's students out of school and led to more than 370 million missing school meals. This is a very interesting situation because the children are out of schools, and the programs of alimentation in the school or meals they can access because the schools are not working. So this is another consequence to have the child in the school in many countries of the world. Lack of access to computers and internet at home means that the distance learning is out of reach for many. The ODS 8 promotes sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Even before the current crisis, the global economy was growing at a slower pace than in previous years, despite improvement in labor productivity and unemployment. Underemployment and unemployment due to the crisis means that 1.6 billion workers who are already vulnerable in the informal economy, half of the world's workforce, this is a very significant number, may be significantly affected with a reduction in their income, about 60% in the first months and years of the crisis. ODS 9, building resilient infrastructure. Well, the pandemic is hitting manufacturing industries hard. It's causing disruption in a global value chains and product supply. Airlines are expected to have 1.5 billion fewer international passengers by 2020, and the seating capacity of international flights could decline by nearly 3/4 quarters, representing a loss of 273 billions compared to previously projected income. The situation in our region is not different to the situation that we are seeing in the rest of the world. As I said at the beginning, the economic and social effects of the COVID pandemic will be enormous and estimate a contraction of 1.8% of the region gross domestic product. I will resume all this part because my colleague Raúl Licausi is the expert, the economic expert. So I don't like to move deeply in this in this part. The third part is about the cooperation. I'll talk about cooperation now. I'm going to my conclusions. Today, we cannot only be immersed in the pandemic. Actually, pandemic is not the worst that we need to face today. Since we are facing a serious global problem such climate change or possible nuclear war, where only a cooperation aim that allows the solidarity of the people could represent the victory. For this reason, it's important asking ourselves what kind of international system of multilateral cooperation we need in the light of this context, emphasizing that the COVID pandemic is not limited to a serious health and sanitary crisis, but has generated and demonstrated an enormous economic and political impact. So what will be the multilateral path plan for this pandemic? Would it be the Marshall Plan, a global recovery plan led by the World Bank, the IMF, of the WTO? Will be the path that the financial oligarchies propose to the world? To seek salvation first for the big corporations and the big banks at expenses of the poorest countries? If this is the case, Africa and Latin American and Caribbean, which do not have trillions of dollars to finance a rescue plan, will end up in collapse. The solidarity and integrationist conscience knows that the pandemic and post-pandemic scenario is not resolved with this kind of proposed teleworking or mobilization of material resources to meet sustainable goals is not the only way and it's not the only things that we need to do to guarantee the welfare of our people. Particularly, the leadership of the South must be very, very important in our future, because the South historically had paid the consequences of the decision taken by the powers of the North. So what will be the joint strategy of the South to face this situation? We should already have a clear horizon, given that the COVID pandemic is not a national problem. It is a global problem. And I will add something. This is really a geopolitical problem. and the South is not part of the global priorities from the North. If a country of the South is not safe, none of them is. We cannot allow any region of the South that lacks a strategic interest for liberalism to be marginalized. So we have this compromise, and from Venezuela, we need to move forward to promote the integration, the cooperation, and the views of the South to face this post-pandemic scenario. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. And last but not least, we are going to listen to Mr. Raúl Icausi, President of the Executive Directory of the Banco del Alba.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my dear colleagues and panelists. I'm very honored to be here as President of the Executive Board of Banco del Alba. And it's an honor to participate in this third international seminar called Developing the Present. This is the third year in a row that we are doing this interesting seminar, and in this third edition, we have chosen the central theme as a central theme, contributions to post-pandemic economy. This is going to allow us to give some ideas to contribute to the debate, as you mentioned at the beginning, in order to give analysis and recommendations to those in charge of the construction of public policies in our governments. In this very difficult situation that the COVID-19 pandemic has bring us not only to the world, but especially, and this is the emphasis that we're doing here at the Banco del Alba, and this is and this seminar, to our region, Latin America and the Caribbean. In this occasion, I want to give some aspects related to the new regional financial architecture, and the advances of Banco del Alba will be addressed, and a special emphasis will be placed on analyzing the problems and perspective of economic development and integration on the member countries of ALBA and Banco del Alba, remembering that it is not only the pandemic that is generating the problems, but also the unilateral and illegal coercive measures that are on 3 or 4 member states, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, with other actions of economic aggression and political destabilization. I want first, with these welcoming words, I want to start my presentation with some inspirational words of President Hugo Chavez back in Petrocaribe Summit. And I will allow myself to read in English, in Spanish, an idea of President in this summit. Un proyecto común debemos elaborar. No podemos seguir nosotros, cada uno con un proyecto particular. No iremos a ninguna parte. Solo es posible el día que tengamos la conciencia alta de que somos una sola nación, que somos una sola patria, o no somos nada. O somos una sola gran patria, o no seremos nada. Convenzámonos de ello, pero convenzámonos de verdad. Porque el imperio siembra intriga, el imperio ala, amenaza, presiona para dividirnos, para mantenernos divididos, enfrentados como muchas veces lo ha logrado, para evitar nuestra unión efectiva, nuestra unión creadora, nuestra unión transformadora. With these words of President Chavez in the Petrocaribe Summit in Cienfuegos on December 21st of 2007, I want to start my presentation. Basically, what we have done is to divide in 3 main blocks: financing for development in the American continent, in which I want to give a very brief historical perspective of financing model for development in the continent. Then we will address cooperation for post-pandemic development, in which I will make a recount of actions that the Alba Bank and the Alba itself has taken in this situation. And at the end, I will have a blog called Banco del Alba, 12 years of developing the present, in which I will give a quick update of not only the financial performance, but where we are right now at the bank. As I said, I wanted first to start with a quick and brief analysis from a historical perspective. Many of our friends in the Caribbean, in the world, has always referred why does the Bolivarian government are always referring to history facts. Well, basically, my friends, because first of all, we are proud of our history, being sons of the liberator Simón Bolívar. We don't have nothing to hide, but we need to know where are we coming from to know where are we going to. So with this, I want to focus very briefly in what we think it's an analysis that we can provide from the point of view of the Bolivarianism. To talk about financing for development in the continent, it has to refer to the historical perspective, as I was saying. The classic analysis of the economy places the origin of the current financial framework in the Bretton Woods Agreement back in 1945. However, from our perspective, it is necessary to carry out an analysis from back to the 18th century, to the 19th century, and from our Bolivarian perspective. In this case, we are referring to the model developed by the liberator Simón Bolívar during the process of independence from the Spanish crown in the 19th century, opposed as antagonist model to the model of the United States. In a summary, a model of integration of Latin America and the Caribbean versus a model of US expansion from the control of the hemispheric space. There is a dichotomy, Monroe Doctrine, again, Bolivarian doctrine. The model of economic development in the American continent, and consequently its financial architecture, can be directly related to the model of geopolitical development that has evolved since the process of rupture of the colonial pact. That's the basic idea. So, in resume, is Bolivarian doctrine versus Monroe doctrine. I have a slide I want to show you quickly the differences of territory in that time. When both doctrines emerged, the national territory of Colombia was Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador, had great advantages against the 13 colonies gathered in the territory of the United States and even Europe. So we had a tremendous advantage, not only in resources, in people, in territory. So basically, some people pointed out that integration needs to be destroyed. Unfortunately, with the death of the liberator back in 1830, the project did not succeed in developing what we know today as a regional financial architecture. So the model that was imposed was from the American point of view of hegemony. Then we had to jump to the agreements of Bretton Woods, where institutions like the World Bank, IMF, BID were created, and the financial architecture that we know today. We had to wait until 2005, 200 years later, when the leadership of Hugo Chavez, Lula da Silva in Brazil, Nestor Kirchner in Argentina, The foundation stone was laid for the development of a financial economic model oriented to regional integration based on the Bolivarian doctrine. This assignment is still pending today, and we in the Banco del Alba we feel not only part because of our history, but completely committed to contribute in its future. The rise of national processes, progressive process in the region, not hegemonically aligned with the United States, has to lead to the development of instances of political agreement that by advancing in regional integration have become targets of Washington attacks. UNASUR, CELAC, ALBA, Petrocaribe has been targeted by United States direct attacks and also by satellite governments of Washington to aim to torpedo the union of our America. In the area of new regional financial architecture, it is worth to underline that regionally three main lines have been drawn to financially facilitate integration and development. New kind of development bank like Banco del Sur and Banco del Alba, a regional reserve fund, a regional compensation system, the Sucre. In conclusion, what I would like to point out is that it is worth remembering as an element of the analysis that the Bolivarian doctrine and the antagonist model of the Monroe Doctrine, the dichotomy, is still present today. Even last year, back in 2019, the not re-elected President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, relaunched at his own the doctrine, enunciating that the doctrine was still alive. And we are always saying we are ready to cooperate and work with United States. The problem is that every time that they see the patterns of integration, the ideas of Bolivar, the answer is the same, the Monroe Doctrine, how to destroy the integration. We recognize the role that United States could play in the region, but if they could respect the sovereignty, if they could have a real dialogue, if its institutions will not always dictating what we need to do. So it is a shame, but it is like that. So basically today, what we're fighting for and what we're fighting against is the same antagonist model. Now, and with this idea, I want to refer to the Banco del Alba and what we're doing through this pandemic time. As you may know, Banco del Alba is a multi-state financial organization that brings together 7 countries of the Bolivarian Alliance: Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Dominica, St. Vincent, and Antigua and Barbuda. In just over a decade, has become a very important tool for financing development. I want to give you some facts of what we have been doing on this very difficult year in the Alba Bank. First, boost health security. The heads of state back in June in a summit of Alba instruct us to become also a bank of medicine. So we have created a special program with medical equipment and health supplies from the Alba TCP, and it has been already established. During the development of the pandemic, Banco del Alba has participated in joint efforts made to guarantee the arrival of medical and diagnosis equipment to the countries of the region. Nowadays, we are collaborating and coordinating with different countries regarding the vaccines and treatment that the governments will choose. We are always insisting that we could be a receptor of whatever vaccine we choose, and respecting every government's idea, and then send it to every single country. So we are in that role. Secondly, we have boosted food security. Banco del Alba, we have done a contribution from the Solidarity Fund, and we have implemented for the equivalent of $5 million aimed to the Eastern Caribbean countries to contribute to the strengthening of the agricultural production system. That is a grant that we have today available, not only for the Eastern Caribbean, we are trying to go further even in Central America. Third, strengthen regional transportation. We're very proud of two projects that we have accomplished this year, and at the very most difficult moment on the crisis in the global aeronautical sector, through the Alba Bank, measures have been taken that have the profound impact on the regional interconnection. Approval of a credit line for the strengthening of the regional airline LIAT, key player in the transportation and interconnection in the Eastern Caribbean and in the Caribbean itself. We have financed also the Venezuelan airline Conviasa. We have promoted the synergy modalities between both airlines. This is not the first time that we are involved in this type of projects. We have finances in the past, different projects of infrastructure for connecting our countries. The airport in St. Vincent has been an example, for example, different ports. But this is the first time that we go and work directly with airlines that will have a direct benefit on the transportation of our people in the Caribbean. D, we have ensured energy security. We are working together with Petrocaribe in the development of financial tools and synergies between both organizations to maintain energy cooperation capacities in the region. Among the synergies, that the creation of the Alba TCP Humanitarian Fund and the Banco del Alba stands out. We are always saying that we are very proud of our Petrocaribe agreement. Unfortunately, we have had the impact of the sanctions and a very harmful approach to PDVSA, the Venezuelan company of oil, but Petrocaribe is very much alive. First of all, because it cannot be substituted. We have said many times we heard from the US administration that Petrocaribe had to be replaced. It cannot be replaced because there is a missing element in the logic of the capitalist system. It is the solidarity and it is the respect for the decisions of the governments. Without those two key elements, it is impossible to replace Petrocaribe. This is why we're doing a special effort. President Maduro has instructed, and we're working very hard to put again the supply. But Petrocaribe exists in projects, in debt, in financing already it is working, and in assets. So us in the Banco del Alba are very proud to keep working with our people of Petrocaribe. Also, we have ensured financial stability. Since mid-2020, Banco del Alba has decided on a moratorium of payment of principal and interest to its entire financing portfolio. During the current year, a contribution that means to the credit takers of the region saving above $6 million. In addition, Banco del Alba is carrying out actions to attract international funds for development to the region, such as the cases as the OPEC Fund for International Development of it, that we have been working closely since last year. As you may see, we have had a very intense year. We have had, even if we have respect the pandemic situation, we have been far from being in quarantine. We have been very active as an institution trying to address different problems of the region, always reaching the governments, always having this deep connection to keep integration, to see what is missing in one country, to see what we have in another, and see how we can engage everybody in this process of integration. To end my presentation, I want also to refer to the current situation of the Banco del Alba. We give always every single year in this international seminar, and that we're very proud that it's becoming part of our activities every year. We always give an update of how the bank is doing, because we're very proud of the results. So this blog, we call it Banco del Alba, 12 years developing the present. As we say it there, Banco del Alba this year will be in its 12th anniversary. 2 weeks ago we celebrated actually. And I would like to give some facts of how the bank it is. Banco del Alba is already a good investment to its shareholders. Over the past 5 years, Banco del Alba has made the largest profits in its history, reached the break-even point, and for the third year in a row has generated profits. Consequently, its equity exceeds its capital. Concerning the historical curve, it shows how the behavior, and you can see it in the screen, the equity has been from 2009 to 2019 and the 9 months of 2020 until reaching the value of $143 million at the end of September 2020. The paid-in capital reflected in the slides indicated $131 million. However, at the time of this seminar, we just concluded last week a ministerial council of Banco del Alba, that it's the most important stage of the Banco del Alba, and the members decided to capitalize its profits on the institution, so now exceeds $132 million to the date. Second fact, positive results despite the global adversities. As you can see in the graphic, during the years 2017 and 18, constant results are observed. In 2019, 19 much higher results were expected than in previous years. Of course, we had the issue, the terrible issue of the pandemic, and considering that the pandemic was beginning to wreak havoc on the global economy by the end of the first quarter of 2020, Banco del Alba decided to take a conservative stance in which significant provisions were made to mitigate the possible negative effects of the pandemic on a global finance. These measures allow us taking actions such as offering all Banalba borrowers a grace period without calculating interest or paying capital through the year 2020. The result of this year, after 3 quarters of 2020, results in a profit of over $3.2 million achieved without having calculated or collected incomes of $4 million, which will place the project result over $8 million. It is a matter of pride to be able to show you a status of positive results while Banalba partners and borrowers have the support of the new kind of development bank at times when the UN and in particularly ECLAC have called on international banks to make their conditions more flexible. But the Bretton Woods framework is neither ready nor willing to take on. Another fact, even in the most adverse economic context, Banco del Alba offers attractive returns. As you can see, In the slide, we can see a comparative study of the performance of Banco del Alba based on the return of equity, which stand at 4.25% for 2018, 3.36% for 2019, and 3.51% for 2020. A comparison of these yields with the most widely used fixed income instruments in the world of finance shows that Banco del Alba yields is higher than other securities issued by the treasuries of Spain, Germany, United States, and even China. The approved reimbursement financing. In the following slide, you can see the volume of reimbursable financing approved with own resources, which shows a constant growth trend, which to date stands at amount exceeding US $136 million. The next slide, we can see the total project portfolio. We see reflected the total financial impact in the region, both with own resources and with resources of third parties, which amount to US $458 million, which doing in a linear distribution in the time means an impact of almost $40 million for every year of existence of our bank. Finally, the last fact is that we are already a relevant and a key player on financing the development in the region. In times where different institutions hide, in times when nobody wants to lend or a lot of measures are taken, we have been there and we keep going on and financing the projects in our member countries. And I would like to take this opportunity to share with this slide, with this last slide, that reflects the financial impact that Banco del Alba has had in the region. The amount reflected in the previous slide, $450 million, which from our perspective is more than an amount, is also translated into experiences throughout the continent that contribute to its integration, its growth, and ultimately to its union. I want to close this presentation with some inspiring words of Commander Fidel Castro in his visit to Venezuela back in 1959. Daniela was probably too young, but we had the visit of Commander Fidel Castro. And I will allow myself to read in Spanish and end my presentation with this. He said, estos pueblos de América saben que su fuerza interna está en la unión y que su fuerza continental también está en la unión. Estos pueblos de América saben que si no quieren ser víctimas de nuevo de la tiranía, si no quieren ser víctimas de nuevo de las agresiones, hay que unirse cada vez más. Hay que estrechar cada vez más los lazos de pueblo a pueblo. Thank you very much. Thank you to our friends, colleagues, panelists. Thank you, host. And we're very proud to keep going on in our path, the path of integration, of union. And we have also very important speeches from prime ministers of the region to close this seminar. Thank you very much to all the team, and thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to assist the speech of Mr. Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda.
I commend the Alba Bank for organizing this important forum, where we can discuss new and innovative ideas to address the threats to our survival and growth that have been presented by COVID-19. I also welcome the President of the Executive Board of the Alba Bank. It was clear, even before COVID-19, that the financial resources available to the Caribbean region are woefully inadequate to meet its developmental needs. The Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, is now 50 years old, and its resources are still very short of what is required to support the robust development plans of Caribbean countries. There are those who say that while the CDB's AAA credit rating is to be commended, we must also acknowledge the bottlenecks and inefficiencies that allow precious capital to sit undisbursed and idle while our region cries out for developmental finance. The only other major developmental finance institution that serves the region is the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, which is also too small and which excludes the OACS countries from its complicated membership structure. The international financial institutions, the IMF and World Bank, have precluded a number of Caribbean states from much needed developmental assistance on the basis of their per capita income. Even though we have argued consistently and vehemently that the vulnerabilities and needs of these Caribbean states should form the basis of eligibility for developmental assistance, our pleas have fallen on deaf ears. Unfortunately, the IFIs continue to use skewed and historical data to preclude countries like Antigua and Barbuda from the much-needed developmental assistance. They continue to present contradictory arguments that our per capita income makes us too wealthy to be eligible for developmental assistance, while acknowledging that we are too poor to meet our debt and other developmental commitments. That is the paradox that we are faced with, and it is therefore imperative for us to develop a hemispheric financial architecture with the appropriate institutions, policies, and programs to adequately address the developmental needs of our region. COVID-19 has exposed the fragile nature and structural weaknesses of our economies, and we now need innovative ideas, new innovative ideas to include the new financial architecture in the region to specifically address the deficiencies that COVID-19 has so cruelly exposed. Our small businesses have been devastated, unable to survive even a few months after a loss of markets. Our health sector's vulnerabilities have been laid bare and will need special support measures in the future to strengthen their capabilities. The key question is, how can a region with a severe shortage of available development capital develop the necessary financial architecture that can meet the needs of the region? Such architecture would include the pooling of resources and must be flexible and innovative to avoid so many of the rigidities that we have seen in today's system. This architecture, including the regulatory environment, will also have to include the private sector, as so many of our businesses and other entities end up approaching commercial banks for financial support in the absence of other available financial instruments that are available in more developed jurisdictions. In this engagement, I believe that the Alba Bank has a central role to play, although I believe also that Alba Bank should open up the conversation to all economic stakeholders in the region. The interest from stakeholders in any new initiative will be determined by a demonstrable benefit to them under any new arrangements. And we will have to exercise great care to ensure that the financial products made available are bespoke financial products that can be delivered on a sustainable basis. This will ensure the financial and economic health of both the borrowing and lending institutions. My view is that the process of the transformation of the developmental finance sector in the Caribbean region has already begun, and it is the Alba Bank that is leading the charge. This transformation is what the current situation in the region demands. Our outreach as Alba Bank should be inclusive, to include academia, global and hemispheric agencies, think tanks, regional businesses, including banks and other lending institutions. In this way, I believe we can build consensus about the new mechanisms that are necessary to jumpstart the post-pandemic economic recovery. Time is not on our side. Our economies may be moving slowly at this time, but change is moving fast. Many of the jobs that have been lost over the past 6 months will not return. That is the reality. Our tourism markets will have different alignments by next year, and we may be moving to a world where a digital vaccination card will be required to travel. Our businesses and other entities will need space, time, and access to finance to be able to adjust to these new conditions. As we in the Alba Bank develop the technical work necessary to properly analyze the complex economic situation that COVID-19 has created, I call for the establishment of a commission that can synthesize the inputs from various stakeholders and create a practical action plan that can enjoy cross-sectoral support throughout the region. My government fully supports the work of Alba, the Alba Bank, and gives a renewed commitment towards its noble objectives. I thank you for the opportunity to participate. Blessings.
Well, thank you very much for participating in this third edition of the seminar, Developing the Present, organized by Banco del Alba. Thank you.
Gracias.